Happy Friday, and thanks for making it through another week with us here on the Rocketeer Minute, where each and every day, Monday through Friday, we go over 1 minute of the greatest adventure movie Walt Disney's ever made, the 1991 Joe Johnston-directed feature, The Rocketeer. I'm one of your hosts, Jim O'Kane of TVDads.com.
And I'm Hal Bryan, an airplane nerd from the Experimental Aircraft Association here in Oshkosh, Wisconsin. So, Jim, I think I've got a pretty cool job, and you've done some amazing work in your career, but our guest today makes me feel like kind of a chump. We are really, really excited to welcome Stefano Paris, who is chief engineer for a company called Jetpack Aviation. And you can tell by the title exactly what they do. He's an engineer, and as I understand it, Stefano, you're a jetpack pilot as well. So welcome to the Rocketeer Minute.
Thank you very much for inviting me to the show. It's a real pleasure.
Yeah, we have Billy Campbell on, who is our Rocketeer, but you are actually a real Rocketeer. You've flown in the sky with a thing on your back that makes it all happen.
Yeah, it's been a long 40-year process for me. It's a privilege, and it's a lifelong dream that has finally come true for all of us, for Nelson Tyler and David Mayman. David is the CEO. Met Nelson about 11 years ago, and we've been doing this ever since. I've actually been doing it since '93 when I first met Nelson. I had gone to a car show in Sacramento at Cal Expo, maybe around 91 or 92, and I didn't even look at any of the cars because they had this James Bond exhibit, 007, and they had one of the original Bell Aerospace rocket belts there, and I had been fascinated about these things forever, but I'd never seen one in person. I spent the entire 4 hours just mesmerized by this rocket belt. I had my little Canovision 8mm video camera, and I filmed the little 13-inch CRT TV that they had there. And they also had a wet bike, which was something Nelson invented in the 70s, alongside the jet ski. He gave me the number of Bill Suter, who was the 19-year-old that lived next door to Wendell Moore, and Wendell Moore is the inventor of the rocket belt in the early 60s, and he became one of their chief test pilots, most experienced pilot of the rocket belt. So I sent off about a 20-page letter back in the day before email. I had email through the university, but nobody really had email yet, and the internet didn't exist publicly. And in that, I had a lot of sketches for ways of how we could do some sort of jetpack other than rockets, because I knew 21 seconds, 30 seconds, that wasn't going to cut it for me. That was the older technology, and I wanted to fly for minutes. And he sent that packet off to Nelson, and Nelson gave me a call, and that's how things really got underway for me.
That's great. You mentioned Bill Suter, and I've been talking to him a little bit lately. We've talked about getting him on the show, and scheduling things are a challenge. But of course, he's a legend in this world. He's the guy, and it was really interesting to me reading up on your company's history about that crossover. Because if I read correctly, if I'm remembering correctly, Nelson worked with Bill on the Bell rocket belt that he flew in the '84 Olympics. Is that right?
Yeah. So the story goes, Nelson's story starts when he was about 10 years old. He was in the backseat of his father's Packard, and on the radio came Buck Rogers. And Buck Rogers and his girlfriend flew down to this planet with their jetpacks, and Nelson thought one day he would have his own jetpack, and years passed and nothing was happening, and he finally decided, well, I'm just going to have to do this myself. And he had seen Bell progress with their rocket belt, and it was at the World's Fair, and Bill Suter had been flying it around. So he took a bunch of detailed pictures of the Bell rocket belt and went back to his shop in Van Nuys. And Nelson is the father of aerial cinematography. Pretty much all those establishing shots from helicopters, they all originated from Nelson and his stabilized or mass stabilized arm technology. So Nelson is really the first civilian to build a rocket belt, and his rocket belt was probably the one for a good 2 to 3 decades before maybe a few other copies started to come into place in the 90s. And in the early 70s, he had completed the rocket belt, but still trying to teach himself how to fly. And he decided to contact Bill Suter. And Bill Suter came out to look at this contraption and was completely blown away by the quality and the beauty that Nelson puts into all the hardware that he designs. You can see on our youtube.com/Jetpack Aviation YouTube channel, you can see a video of Bill Suter flying Nelson's rocket belt for the first time in the parking lot on a tether system that is still there after all these years, 45 years, I think.
That's amazing.
And you can see after like the first little puff, they get it adjusted. Bill is like, oh, this is great. He takes his hand off and he does the okay signal and thumbs up and then keeps on flying. And Nelson is just like, how is he flying with just one hand? But Bill definitely has the most flights, 21-second flights, and is an expert with these types of devices. So.
In these the original Bell rocket belts, if I'm remembering correctly, they were like hydrogen peroxide, right? Hydrogen peroxide jets sort of up off the shoulders.
Yeah, so it has 3 tanks. 2 of them are hydrogen peroxide, and the center one is nitrogen to like 2,000 psi, but they have a regulator down to just shy of 600 psi, and there's no real moving parts other than that ruby valve, throttle valve, and it is a rocket. And there's a catalyst pack full of silver screens right behind your neck, and the nitrogen pushes the hydrogen peroxide into that catalyst pack where it expands 5,000 times its volume into steam, like 1,300 degree steam, and that comes jetting out the tubes on either side of you, and right about your waist you have, or maybe slightly above your waist, you have the rocket nozzles. Along with the 2 little jet evaders for yaw control. You're just basically flying on 2 really small pinky-sized columns of steam. You don't want to get underneath them; they're hot. But that's how pretty much all the rocket belts have flown, and everything's balanced around your center of gravity. And you'll see that also with our jetpack. It's one thing, unfortunately, that the movies don't get right is the positioning of where the jets should be, both in the Rocketeer and any other jetpack things you might have seen in the movie. You'd probably go tumbling with the jets mounted where they are on your back. There, they need to be mounted, or the thrust exits need to be mounted right at the center of gravity of you. Of the pilot.
That's interesting. And you mentioned a couple of times these 21-second flights, 30-second flights, and that was pretty much the standard from the 60s for decades after that. Bell did a little bit of work with a proper jet, as opposed to the rocket belts that I think maybe flew 5 minutes, something like that, but or maybe was capable of that. But Jetpack Aviation's been iterating for quite a while, and you guys are now sort of getting a lot of attention in the news with the JB9, now the JB10. And how long can that one fly?
Yeah, it's always dependent on how much fuel you can carry. Our JB10, the difference between JB9 and JB10 has to do a lot with the detail of the hardware and also a new fuel tank. But we can fly almost 10 minutes. It's really dependent on pilot weight. If you have too much pilot weight, maybe you might not be able to fill up all the fuel. If you have a lighter pilot, of course, you can fill the tank, which is almost 10 gallons full. Burn about a gallon a minute with the jets while you're flying around.
Is it Jet A or is it any particular type of fuel? I mean, will it be gasoline, diesel, whatever? I'm not sure what you'd use.
Well, the generic is kerosene, but yes, we primarily use Jet A that you'd find at any airport. Helicopters or jets use. It can run on diesel. We have run it on diesel if Jet A isn't available. Jet A is preferred because it's a cleaner fuel and it lights off nicely. And 10 minutes is a really long time. People get bored watching a jetpack maybe after about 3 minutes. The rocket belt was always...
What kind of world do we live in where somebody's bored watching a jetpack? That's amazing.
Yeah, no, I agree. I of course, I would never get bored, but during demonstrations and things, if it lasts maybe more than 3 minutes, people start looking down at their phones. But no, it's... Each time one of our jetpacks flies, whether I'm an assistant, spectator, or flying it, it's really special. I can't take my eyes off of it. real dream come true.
I've seen the video where there's a jetpack flying over Monaco, and I don't think my mouth closed the entire time I was watching the video. It's astonishing to see the amount of control and just the simplicity of it all. It's amazing. It's just amazing to see a flight. How long on a first flight, how long does it take you to get used to, control of it as you're, lifting off or aiming in direction? Is it very is it easily body conscious? Do you get the feedback immediately, or does that take a while to get used to?
I think you do. We can talk a little bit about training. I went through training with another individual in his 30s. He has no aviation experience, hasn't really been thinking about this much during his life. I, of course, have been dreaming about flying since I saw Superman in 1978. I was about 8 years old, and I thought, wow, that is the most amazing thing ever. I would love to soar without wings, just flying through the air. And then, of course, I saw the Olympics 1984 opening ceremony with Bill Suter flying Nelson Tyler's rocket belt over the stadium, and on. And of course, the Rocketeer was just, I saw that, it was probably June or so, 1991, at a theater in Sacramento. I had specifically driven to Sacramento to see that movie, and I might have gone there twice, which is a rarity at the time to go to the theater twice to see the movie. But I would say within the first few tether flights, we have a training facility that we've set up with a tether overhead. It's about 30 feet up off the ground, about 150 feet. One side is tied to a scaffold. The other is tied to a eucalyptus tree. It's been working out okay. Again, everybody is somewhat resource constrained, but this is a big improvement over earlier tether systems at the shop where we were much more constrained with space. Within a few flights, you generally pick it up. It tends to be very intuitive. It's similar control systems as the rocket belt. You have pitch are the arms. You pull them up to go backwards, push them down to go forwards. If you roll them side to side, you'll go either to the right or to the left. And in your left hand, you have a yaw control. That's for turning. Those control little jet evaders at the end of our jets differentially. Their opposed motion. You don't have to touch that too much. You just have to kiss the jets a little bit with it, and you'll either turn left or right. And the right hand is a throttle, and it operates the same way the rocket belt did, and that is you twist it away from you. It's reverse of a motorcycle. Again, it's mounted vertically versus horizontally like on a motorcycle. And that seems to make the most sense. I asked Bill, why was it that way? And the human factors engineers at Bell Aerospace 50 years ago decided that would be the most intuitive for going up and going down or increasing power. And it takes about maybe 5 to 10 flights, and then you're capable of hovering 25 feet off the ground close to the tether. We have a automatic descender that we're attached to, so if anything were to happen and you chop power, the descender locks like a seatbelt and keeps you from falling, which is really nice, but it also is free moving. It lets you move back and forth on this tether. There's a video as well on our YouTube channel, again, youtube.com/Jetpack Aviation, of David flying on our tether system from a couple years ago. So you can see how that all works.
Wow.
And you guys are doing, I don't know if I would call it a contest or something. You're putting out a call for people that want to learn to fly a jetpack. I just got your mail the other day.
Yeah, that's coming from our marketing guy. We did do a contest, it's about 6 months ago, for the first person to try on our jetpack and go for a couple flights. That was won by a vlogger, Misha Pollack, and I think we conducted that in March. He came out and he did a couple flights, and he has an aerospace background, which maybe helped a little bit, but you can see he was starting to understand the control aspects definitely by the second flight. He could take off and he could maybe translate a little and turn. We've developed a pretty serious training regimen that by about 50 flights on the tether, you should be practiced enough to go free flight, go off the tether. And people learn at different rates, but that seems to be a nice number in terms of training flights.
So something I've been wondering about is, and this may be a little bit too legally nerdy for a lot of our audience, but as you guys are starting to ramp up to sell these things to people and things, how are they going to be certified? It's too fast to count as an ultralight in the U.S., or at least the potential is too fast, isn't it?
Well, that is an ongoing process. We've been working with the FAA the entire time since our very first public demonstration flight, which was David's flight around the Statue of Liberty in November 3rd of 2015. Initially, we had been hoping we could get certified under Part 103 ultralight, but yes, there is a speed issue and there's a fuel quantity issue.
Oh, right, yeah, 10 gallons. You've got too much fuel aboard.
So that's a process right now. It'll get a little nerdy in detail to go into that, and what if it can't be Part 103, then possibly it has to be experimental. And the real problem is that for these types of vehicles, there are no regulations yet that exist. So we've been told we're the tip of the spear, which could be a good thing or a bad thing, but we're having to sort of set the standard of how these vehicles will be regulated, type certificated, who signs off on whether somebody is proficient to fly. At the moment, David, of course, is the most expert jetpack pilot probably in the world from all his flights.
Do you foresee things like filing a flight plan I'm trying to picture in an ideal world, what would it be like being a Rocketeer of what you'd have to do you have to call the center or things like that to?
Well, at the moment, Nelson and myself and even David, we pursued this out of the sheer joy and fun and dream of just flying. So we initially we just wanted our own jetpack, and I look at it as a great form of recreation, sort of like jet skiing or motocross. People load up their bikes and go out to the desert and go have fun. Maybe you have a jetpack and you load it up and you go to the lake and you go flying around. We are working, of course, on always ever improving the reliability of all the systems, as well as redundancy and safety. So there could be some point in the future where we maybe have enough safety systems. If you wanted to fly over land, you could, but for the time being, we try to limit all our flights to over water or, of course, on the tether. We'll see how it goes. I'm an engineer, so I always think in terms of practical terms. There is marketing where, of course, we would love to have everybody have their own jetpack. And
sign me up.
Yeah.
Does it float? I'm just thinking if you're doing a lot of over water stuff and you're low on fuel and things like that, and you wind up in the drink. What's the plan when you're in the water with it?
It does float. There's at least 3 items on it that will help it float. One is the fuel tank itself. The fuel is lighter than water. If you go in, maybe you don't go in the first second. So there's a lot of air in the fuel tank. So that will provide some buoyancy. We also have a automatically CO2 inflating flotation system on the very back of the jetpack. You'll see it whenever we fly over water, Monaco, Statue of Liberty, London, or Long Beach. We have this little black cartridge that bolts to the back of the fuel tank, and if that ever hits the water within half a second or less, there's a little pellet in there that melts and it automatically inflates into a big balloon. Now that saves the jetpack. Nelson was always interested in making sure that the jetpack gets saved. As for the pilot, we got a little flotation waste unit that also is automatically inflating if it ever gets wet, and that saves the pilot. The pilot also can eject from the jetpack just by touching the 2 buckles on either side. They're the same ones that Nelson used on the rocket belt 50 years ago. You just touch them and all 5 belts just pop right off and you're out of the jetpack.
Wow.
So
that's amazing.
What's the flight ceiling? I'm just wondering on just general terms is there an altitude record on your particular rocket belt?
Jet belt, rather. I think it's been listed that, it'll operate at 10,000 feet, maybe higher. It's all dependent. Air gets less dense as you go higher, so having enough thrust to still take off. Definitely operates great at sea level and maybe a couple thousand feet. That's where we've been flying it. We haven't done any altitude records yet. You'd either need to time it so that you have enough fuel to descend and land, or you just go for it and then have a parachute. So you go until you run out of fuel and then throw out your parachute and do the landing. But it's definitely extremely responsive. That's something that has been amazing to see. We never went untethered until the summer. It was in July of 2015. We went to my uncle's farm up Northern California, and David went for his first 3 free flights, and you can see those also on our YouTube channel. Those are the first videos that went live along with the Statue of Liberty. Up until then, we had been very quiet. I've been keeping this secret from everybody for 25 years that, oh yeah, I work on jetpacks. I mean, I might have mentioned it here and there, but everybody says, that's crazy. That'll never happen. So, and through the years,
the hardest secret to keep.
Yeah, up until a certain point. I mean, I've always wanted to think young. So if you have a dream, you should pursue it. And there'll be a lot of maybe older folk, other than Nelson, that will say, you can't do that. That's impossible. And I just didn't want to believe that it wasn't possible to do. I had to have sort of earn a living for a good 20 years. So unfortunately, the whole jetpack thing always took a back burner, was like a weekend thing.
No pun intended.
Yeah. And, but it all really started to come together a few years ago. And I found myself in a position where I could just jump head in and feet first, and just we've been working on it 24/7 for a good couple years. And if you watch the videos, you'll seen the evolution of the machine here and there. And you mentioned JB9, JB10. I mean, I'm working really hard to complete JB11 in the next few weeks. So that's a pretty significant upgrade and change to the existing jetpack. It will have an additional 130 pounds of thrust. Right now we have about 400 pounds of thrust, so we're bumping up to about 530.
Wow.
We like to always say, in thrust we trust, and more thrust just means more performance. It will be astonishing to see taking off with a full tank of fuel, having a whole extra 100 pounds of thrust. I mean, it'll just rocket, just probably like the Rocketeer. Right now, sometimes when we take off, you'll see us be cautious, of course, the very first 30 seconds or a minute or so. But the vehicle does get lighter as you burn off the 60 to 70 pounds of fuel, just like the rocket belt. It's happening slower. The rocket belt was always, as soon as you took off, I believe Bill says, you have an emergency landing situation. You need to be thinking about where you're going to land, and the whole time, just to even hover, you have to be coming off the throttle, because you're burning 60 pounds of 11 pound per gallon hydrogen peroxide in 20 seconds. You're burning it so quickly that you're becoming light. And if you just hold one position on the throttle, you rocket upwards. So those rocket belt pilots were really very experienced at flying those machines. And it wasn't maybe as smooth of an experience if you watch, everything that's going on, versus the jetpack is a much more relaxed. It is stable. Once you have a little bit of training, I'm just very calm with it. You do things more slowly with the throttle. There's a little bit of delay because it's a jet, so there's some inertia trying to spool up the turbines and spool them down. So you might anticipate, you develop a flying skill where you anticipate, you don't think about it, but like if you go into a corner or you bank or you're going to go forward, you'll probably get on the throttle right just before you pitch forward, and you won't lose any altitude. So it'll look very natural. I like it. I really like how it responds.
And yeah, spoiler alert, we heard that same exact phrase, "I like it," from Billy Campbell in the next minute of this movie. Speaking of the minute and the movie itself, as this minute particular starts, minute 45, we see Cliff coming up on the Ford Trimotor. And then doing a little formation flying with it. And of course, you would never be flying completely horizontally. You're always in a vertical attitude, leaning a little bit.
Yeah, at the moment, we'll never fly horizontal. There are plans to, along with the increased thrust that we're going to have, try to range extend. So we'll get a little more horizontal. I mean, we might get to 60 degrees, I think.
Wow. And then you've got somebody like Yves Rossi out there who actually has the wings on his back, and he has to launch by helicopter, but then he can fly with small turbines.
Yeah.
And we at EAA operate not only a Ford Trimotor like what we're seeing on the screen here, we operate a B-17 bomber, and we did a formation flight with him in the B-17, which was
awesome,
absolutely surreal. To be, this B-17, and then here comes this guy flying alongside, really right out of this scene in the movie, and it's making me think now we've got to do something like that with our Trimotor. Very, very quickly before we get away from this part of this clip, the airplane you're looking at there, 1929 Ford Trimotor, really the first mass-produced all-metal airliner, really created the modern airline industry as we know it, certainly in the U.S. and in North America. And what some people might get a kick out of is that this individual airplane, this is November 414 Hotel, is currently flying with Grand Canyon Airlines, and you can actually go book a trip on this if you want to do a sightseeing trip out in the Grand Canyon. And Jim, by the time this is aired, when we're recording it, not quite yet, but by the time this is aired, you will have taken a Ford Trimotor flight.
That's right. I had a great time. I'm sure.
I'm sure in the future I will have had.
Yeah, it's. I don't. I'll report back if I saw any fellow with a rocket pack on his back. But yeah, it's one thing that caught me on the scene is where is the kill switch on your machine? I didn't know if you probably have something where you have to hit it several times to turn off the power, I would think.
Yeah, I was rewatching this clip the other night, and there's a lot of little interesting subtleties that, without trying to recreate it, I guess possibly we might have recreated it. You see Bill Campbell or, Cliff Secord, the character, flying the Rocketeer or the rocket belt by the Ford Trimotor, and he salutes the stewardess. Stewardess's name was Taylor Gilbert. David, when he was doing the Statue of Liberty, it hasn't been shown yet. There is a documentary that has been filmed for years that will hopefully come out in a few months on the whole Jetpack experience. It's called Own the Sky. David saluted this Statue of Liberty during his free flight there in November 2015. We've always had a kill switch on the Jetpack to be safe. It's something that Nelson insisted on putting in there. The initial kill switch, we had concerns that it might actually kill the Jetpack while you're flying. It wasn't reliable enough, I felt, and also David. After those initial flights, and definitely before the Monaco flights, we actually removed that kill switch. There is a main master switch, and there's a FADEX system that takes care of powering up the engines and controlling them, idling, and the whole throttle system. The concern is what happens if there's some sort of emergency, say you fall over on the ground or something and you can't turn the engines off. You wouldn't want to get, blasted from them. You'd want to be able to immediately kill the Jetpack. So I spent significant number of days trying to improve the existing system before we just disabled it. Then as of maybe, I think it was April, I built a third Jetpack in April, and I got to finally implement a much more, as I say, Steph spec kill switch. It's waterproof, hermetic, magnetic. The lanyard is not going to fall off. It's sort of like a personal watercraft kill switch. You have a lanyard you put around your right wrist.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Before you start everything, you make sure that's engaged or it won't start. And the difficulty is how long does that lanyard have to be? If you leave it long like it is on a personal watercraft, well, you have to completely fall off the vehicle before the engine is killed. Here, You're strapped in. You may be strapped in and you need those engines off. So I have the lanyard in such a length that if you extend your arm fully, you'll probably pull the kill switch off. So it's your right hand. The right hand should stay on the throttle at all times. As we get more experience, you see pilots maybe taking their hands off to salute, etc. I think saluting might be okay, but I might not want to do it with my right hand. So it could be possible. I have witnessed the engines getting killed after a landing on a tether flight because the pilot hadn't, it was the first time we were flying this new belt, and he extended his arm fully, and off goes the engine. So it definitely tested the kill switch. It does work. So you want to respect that. We'll see how things proceed, whether it's something that we really should have or if it should be disabled. I think there's still a reason to have one on the off chance something were to happen and you really needed to turn those engines off, it would be nice to just rip your arm away and off go the engines. So
or it's reality imitating art. Then I guess just don't wave too enthusiastically.
Yeah. You can do everything you want with your left hand. Use your left hand. So
use the left. Apropos of absolutely nothing, it's obviously Jim and I and you as well, Stefano, we dearly love this movie. We have nothing but affection for it. Jim and I committing to spending a lot of time diving into it and enjoying it so much. I have to apologize and say that this minute, for some reason, contains my least favorite scene in the entire film, and that is we're going through the cornfield, and then we cut to the two old guys, one of whom is Tiny Ron Lothar out of makeup, and I'm not sure who the other guy is. Maybe Jim knows. And their little big gopher thing. I don't know why. That's just too weak of a joke for me, and I've got to go. I've got to get that off my chest. I've got to get it out there so we can move on with our lives.
Well, if it helps, we a little bit earlier in the series we talked with Lisa Peterson, who was talking about the orange groves that they're blowing through here, and unfortunately, I mean, this whole scene can never be repeated because that entire orange grove is now some kind of a housing development.
Sure.
It's just the march of time has taken away a lot of agriculture in this part, not too far from Santa Maria Airport, where the original GB scenes were filmed. But yeah, all those oranges the trees are gone, and it's now split level homes.
That's the ultimate Southern California cliche right there. This whole thing used to be orange groves as far as the eye could see, and now housing development.
No, exactly. I mean, I live in Ventura County, and all these areas were orange groves, I was told, and now they're just homes. But there's a lot of similarities in this orange grove scene and our existing operations too. Not intentional. As for your comment about this scene, it wasn't until you contacted me for this interview that I finally understood what that farmer was saying. For me, my entire life that I've watched this movie, I didn't hear Big Gopher. I just thought he was like, "Hey, Gopher, check out that Gopher going." So I always thought, to me, it was rather funny versus this Big Gopher, and maybe that's what he should have said instead of the Big Gopher, because I mean, here is this man just rocketing away at 10 feet. Yeah. But when we go to our training facility that we set up, we actually do drive through a citrus grove, citrus orchard of lemons. So it's very similar to the trees look just like this, and we're traveling down between them for a good mile or two before we get to our little gated area where we have our tether system set up.
Yeah. So you've never wound up flying with a bed sheet over your head. So that's
no.
Hopefully.
No.
Right. Yeah. Or flown through a clothesline or anything else like that. So, well, Stefano, I guess you've kind of answered this when we talk about operations over water versus over land, but I've got to ask, or at least express, that I hope you guys know that we would dearly love to see you guys out here at Oshkosh for AirVenture 1 year, whenever that makes sense, whenever you guys think you're ready for it. And we have a seaplane base. We have a whole area down there with nothing but water.
Yeah, no, I've been an EAA member probably since I was 15 years old.
Yeah, that's wonderful.
In the 80s, and tried to make it out last year. We tried to contact there. We just couldn't make it happen. And this year we have a lot of things scheduled. So maybe 2018 will be the magic year to come on out there. And of course, we'll have evolved far and beyond what we had last year and what we had this year. So,
and maybe I need to come out and see you guys and talk about a story for the magazine.
You're always welcome to stop by our shop. Yeah.
I was wondering about.
Sorry, Jim. Business.
I was wondering about instrumentation when you're up. I'm assuming that you have an altimeter, you've got fuel quantity, maybe a compass. Is there any kind of other information that you're getting while as a pilot besides just the feel of what's happening?
I've spent a significant effort on the instrumentation system that we have so far. Initially, the only instrumentation system we had was a single, fairly dim, slow blinking red LED, and you'll see that on our Statue of Liberty flight. That would go on with about maybe 2 minutes of flight time left, maybe a little less at the time. David had a timer also that he would use to make sure that he would start coming in before that light comes on. He got pretty mesmerized by that flight. I think he was caught out there and the light went on and he's like, "Oh, when did this thing start flashing?" And you'll see him race to the ship really quickly. And, he landed had about a quart left of fuel on that flight. That was pretty close. But
Wow.
since then, we've mainly been interested in knowing our fuel quantity. So at the moment, and this is continually evolving every few months. First came up with what's called a pilot warning display system. If you check out our Instagram, you'll see a video at like 8 p.m. at night where we tested out for the first time in March of 2016. And it just had a series of 9 super bright LEDs. The top LED is the most important one. That's our low fuel indicator. It'll blink vigorously, quickly red when you're low on fuel, or it's just green, solid green when you have enough fuel. So when you get down to the last 2 gallons, it switches from green to a very rapidly flashing red. The other lights are mainly related to the engines at the time. It's evolved into a dual OLED display where we have engine instrumentation data it's on the right pod, but the left screen is for the left engine, the right one's for the right engine. We can monitor RPM in thousands of RPM, exhaust gas temperature, our fuel pump voltages, all sorts of other engine parameters in the start sequence and for calibration reasons. So that's our focus right now. We're always flying relatively close to the ground, so altimeters probably not that important yet, but I'm hoping I have screen real estate on the left pod to add airspeed and altitude and all those other pilot nav. Maybe we'll put a little GPS, but I think a lot of this, people always say, oh, it needs to be in the HUD, a heads-up display unit. For right now, I've been keeping it there on the pods just because they can get filmed by the GoPros. We always have a record of what was going on, and everybody can refer to them versus only the pilot says, oh, I see this red light, and you're like, well, which red light is that? So, but when we fly, we like to see all green. So you'll see in a lot of the videos, like the London flight, etc., you'll see this nice Christmas tree of green lights. If anything is yellow, that's like a warning. Maybe take a look at me. If it's red, you should probably land. Of course, we're still tuning sometimes the exhaust gas temperatures, so I wouldn't freak out completely if you see a red exhaust gas temperature. Sometimes it blips into the red, but we'll probably set a slightly higher limit for that.
Hey, can you fly one engine out? How does that operate?
With the existing JB9 and JB10, you can't. It requires both those engines are operating. JB11 is a change in philosophy. It's interesting because when we first started this project with the jets, our JB6 had 12 jet engines. So in terms of redundancy there was a lot of it. Of course, trying to get 12 jet engines to run about 10 years ago with the electronic controls that were available back then, it was rather challenging. That's why JB7 came along, and that had 8 engines, so we reduced the number there. And then there was a sort of significant change to going to something that was as small as possible, which is sort of the JB9 series, and it took a diversion there. But again, working towards reliability and safety and redundancy, you're going to see a few more engines coming on board so that we can tolerate an engine out situation and still be flying.
Wow, everybody wants that Iron Man experience. I mean, I know, understand what you're saying with the instrumentation, but I think there's obviously a common push toward a heads up where you've got blinking lights and all kinds of numbers that don't really mean that much when you're flying. But
and some sort of aerial Siri chattering at you the whole time. Yeah, I've got to say quickly, Stefano, the Long Beach flight you guys did. I've been watching you guys, for the last few years, watching closely and drooling with envy. But that Long Beach flight really hit home for me. My wife and I were married aboard the Queen Mary, so I'm sitting there thinking, here's this ocean liner, special place for me. My favorite ship of all time. There's a jetpack flying around. I assumed you guys did that just for me, and that anybody else who saw it was kind of irrelevant. So my thanks to the whole company.
We might have done it just for you. If you look at our view count, I think even after 4 or 5 months, we only had maybe 10,000 views, maybe.
Really?
For some reason, nobody ever really learned that we flew in front of the Queen Mary. It was supposed to be our inaugural LA flight. Took a lot of effort to get permission to do that flight.
Sure.
There's a whole nother story associated with that flight. David might have received the first ticket for jetpacking ever by the Harbor Patrol, but now they can't find the ticket. So thankfully, hopefully that episode is over. Wow. But we did have full certificate of authorization for that flight
Wow.
that the other agencies, had provided to us. So that was a sanctioned flight, and
Well, Jim, maybe we can link or even embed this one on the landing page for this particular episode at
Oh, for sure. Yeah,
rocketeerminute.com.
it's definitely if you go to this particular episode, we'll have a bunch of links. I'm sure to the YouTube page, to Jetpack's main site, and everything else that we can find on it.
So two other movies that are important. I mean, Iron Man, definitely, just that ability to fly just in a suit of armor. That's been a favorite, as well as another movie that seems to. I mean, if we go on IMDb, you'll always see how movies are rated, and I never understand. I think Rocketeer should be 10 stars out of 10. Of course, it's I believe 6.5 stars out of 10 on their rating scale from the critics. But Disney came out in 2015 with a movie called Tomorrowland.
Yeah.
It happens to have 6.4 stars out of 10. Now, it is a darker movie, but I went to see it, of course, for the jetpacks. And
same here.
And, that opening scene with a young Frank Walker going to the 1964 World's Fair, and he's getting judged in that contest, like, why did you build a jetpack? And he's like, can't it just be fun, like for the practical purpose? And so Nelson and David and I went to see that movie in June of 2015, right after it came out, right before we did our free flights. And at the end of the movie, we're just sitting there in the theater looking at each other and going, well, it's quite possible we're the only people in the world with a jetpack, and we're going to go fly it, next month, free, as the theater is emptying out. And it was a special moment seeing that.
It's a shame. I mean, Disney seems to be able to make these great movies that they don't know where their audience is for them. I mean, I feel this way about Tomorrowland. I feel that way about Rocketeer. I'm not sure if you saw John Carter of Mars. It just seems to be these great films that I'm their audience. They just don't know, who I am or who all of us are that, enjoy these kind of films that you can put yourself in the picture saying, I wish I were the Rocketeer. I wish I could do the things that are here. And in your case, you've done that.
Exactly.
Yeah. These are special films, definitely cult classics. Nelson has built himself a Cirrus X3 over a decade ago. It's extremely authentic. I mean, if you look at it, you probably couldn't tell it from the original. In the movie, he has the exact same leather jacket that Bill Campbell wears. He has the pants, the boots, even the pistol, and of course the helmet, the classic Rocketeer helmet. And we have multiple of the Rocketeer posters from the movie all laminated around the shop, as well as a lot of the other comic book strips from Dave Stevens with his Betty Page girlfriend in there. So,
well, we're going to have to talk with Billy's listening to the show, so we're going to have to get Billy Campbell maybe to come out and give his blessing on your organization. Just I'm sure
it'd be a pleasure to meet Bill after all these years. I really enjoyed his performance in this movie. I also really enjoyed Jennifer Connelly's performance.
Oh, for sure.
Of course.
So.
Any breathing male probably did.
Yeah.
Stefano, any chance you could maybe snap a picture of some of the stuff inside your office or of Nelson's outfit or anything we could share?
Yeah, I was actually digging through some photos from 10 years ago because I thought this was going to be a more visual thing, so I'd have to dig up some stuff. So we'll get those to you. Yes.
Fantastic.
Oh, that'd be great. I'd love to share
I have another question. I mean, I know you're working on all this propulsion equipment for a flying man, but have you looked at other applications, like maybe a small jet or being able to, superpower an ultralight, make a different class of winged aircraft?
We've been looking at trying to develop other various flying platforms, and there's also our eVTOL effort that David's been pushing. We call Blade Runner, but it's a commuter type vehicle. Awesome. I mean, there's several organizations out there right now working on electric powered flight for the sort of 0 to 200 mile regime, just to get to work and back really quickly. Larry Page, for instance, is one with his Kitty Hawk efforts. So and
the Kitty Hawk was just making the rounds a couple of weeks ago. Sort of a multi-copter you sit on, flying over the water with a almost looked like an old hippity hop toy in the middle of it. That looked like a kick.
We
There's no jetpack.
We talked with Eric Lindbergh a few weeks ago about his efforts with Embry-Riddle is getting big into electric flight and looking at those things where you can have a flying car that it doesn't require a wing thing, but it's more like you have more of a Jetsons car where just you hover around to take it like an air taxi to different places. And
yeah, well, my background actually is heavy in electrics. I've been involved in the Southern California Plug-in America movement for the earliest stages. I worked for a company that created the EV1 for General Motors. Also worked for about a decade on solar-powered aircraft. You might have heard about Pathfinder and Centurion and Helios. Helios was, 247-foot wingspan aircraft that weighed only about 1,500 pounds, but we achieved the world's high-altitude record for propeller-driven flight, about 100,000 feet back in 2003. So, and I was involved with the X Prize, the Progressive Insurance Automotive X Prize, which was a 2010 competition for vehicles that do better than 100 miles per gallon equivalent. Of course, electric vehicles won out in that competition there. So I have a keen interest in electric propulsion. It's incredibly instantaneous, powerful, and very efficient. And I actually am working on an electric jetpack.
Wow.
We have a lot to do with the fuel still, but trying to bring that up to speed as well. So we'll have some alternatives. Batteries only continue to get better. So once you nail the platform, run times will only increase as the years pass.
Yeah, it's almost like Moore's Law, only for power. It's just the incredible power of batteries becoming more dense, the charge time is becoming faster and faster. It really is the future, but the future seems to be very, very soon. It's not the distant future. It all seems to be coming up very quickly in this next decade. So exciting times, definitely.
But back to the jetpack, it's strapping that thing on your back the first time is it's a tremendous amount of power that you have at your fingertips, and you acclimate to it after the first few flights. It might be a little scary that first time coming up on the power. Once you acclimate to it, it's a type of flying. I have my private pilot's license I got when I was 17. I've done all the RC planes and RC helicopters back when it was really hard to do, and it was all gas powered in the late 80s, early 90s. But this jetpack, I just can't get enough of it. So it's been a lifelong dream, and I'm happy that we finally were able to achieve it. I wish we could have achieved it 10 or 20 years ago when I was a little younger, but it is happening. So
do you come down horse? Because I would think if I were flying that thing, I would be yelling the whole time. It must be something that you just must be hooting as it's flying. I can't imagine just being calm inside while you're wearing it.
I'm probably just smiling the whole time. I'm pretty calm. It's good to be calm. You're trying to manage a lot of power, but it lets you to be more lucid up there while you're flying around. But it's not as probably violent as the rocket belt is. You come up on the power slowly, and it's hard to describe just what it feels like, but it's almost like these two big pillowy marshmallows are lifting you up, and then you're just sort of hanging there, and you're just like, wow. I can go anywhere I want. I can go forward, backwards, up. I can scale this building. It was a true joy to finally, get off the tether and just be free and just let it travel. I got up to 50 miles an hour or so, and zoomed around for a few minutes, and it's very beautiful.
I can only imagine.
It's stunning. Wow. Well, this has been a great revelation that how close we are to having a flying. We do have a flying man, but I mean the idea of where this is going to go in the near future is astonishing.
And the fact that you guys have you've improved the endurance by a factor of 20. That's just amazing. We were stuck in that 30-second range for so long, and then here you guys are. I know it's been 40 years for Jetpack Aviation, but from our point of view, it just seems like finally, bam, there it is. So you guys have a lot to be proud of.
Thank you.
I guess the next step is to land on the back of a dirigible, but we can hold that for a later date. But wow. Well, thanks so much for being on the show. I'm glad we can share a movie that you love and that we love, and knowing that seeing this movie was kind of a kickoff to your career where you're at now. We have a great time listening to all these people that have told us in the past how their involvement in aviation came out of this movie, and here's another story of that. For people listening in on the show that want to talk some more about how the Rocketeer affected their lives, we are available at a bunch of different social media places where you can talk to us. Of course, we are available always on Twitter, Rocketeer Minute. We are available on Facebook at facebook.com/Rocketeer Minute. You can also get us at the big site, as we were talking about before, rocketeerminute.com, where you can see there's a whole bunch of links in this particular episode. So go to see a bunch of associated links with this new technology. But you can pick up on old episodes there as well. So visit rocketeerminute.com. If you are not already subscribed, please go to iTunes or Google Play. Sign up, just search for Rocketeer Minute and subscribe, and you can get us hot and fresh every morning. A brand new episode Monday through Friday. So don't miss the next exciting episode, because this is how we want to have every episode. Again, thanks so much, Stefano, for being on the show, and we'll pick it all up next week here on the Rocketeer Minute. So until next time, over and out.
Go get him, kid.